terms of sampling, there are three things that we start looking at for types of bags that we see. Ziplocs tend to be something that work well if we're dealing with wet soils, to keep that soil in there and to keep our bag from degrading. The other two options we see are just a simple hardware bag. There are those options that are out there that can be utilized. But most soil labs are going to want you to use some bag that would be provided from that lab because they're set up to handle those bags in the throughput of their lab process. One of the things you want to watch though with Ziplocs is, again, if we have a very wet soil sample, we can see denitrification occur if that sample is put in a hot place in a sealed bag. But some of the bags that actually provided from the labs are also lined, which in effect give us the same effect of a Ziploc, where we don't see any air exchange within those bags, and we can see some of the same processes occur. So it's very important when you're selecting a bag and when you're storing a bag to try to minimize some of that microbial activity to make sure the nitrate is still there in the soil, it's in the level at which you sampled from the particular field. In terms of submissions of samples, drying versus submitting in a moist state really depends on how quickly the samples can be submitted to the lab. If you're able to go in and drop a sample off right away, most labs are going to have a rapid drying of the sample, which is beneficial because, again, what we're trying to do is to get rid of that moisture to slow down or stabilize the microbial activities where we won't see any net change in the nutrient. One thing that's very important to note is when you take a sample and you submit it to a lab is the amount of the sample that's actually used for analysis. Most analysis procedures are only going to use about 1 to 2 grams of the sample that you take. So this is important when it comes to mixing and homogenizing your sample, particularly in the field. If you're only using a portion of the total sample collected, to make sure that the sample is homogenized enough where you're getting a representative sample. Typically what we suggest is above 26 part per million. If the test comes back at this level, you should be adequate with nitrogen. 21 to 25 part per million, you're probably about adequate as well, and below 20 part per million or below is typically where we see that you're probably going to be short. We're going to need to supply some supplemental nitrogen. At that point, it's sitting down with your retailer, or sitting down with whoever's making the decisions, helping you, or if you're doing it yourself, then figuring out how much to apply. Typically with supplemental end conditions, if we've applied a full rate of nitrogen, if we're trying to make a decision based on the pre-citrus nitrate test, between 40 to 70 pounds in corn on corn, or 30 to 50 in corn following soybeans is typically about optimum. So it's one of the things to do is just make sure, one, you're getting an accurate value. So again, watch how the sample is being handled to make sure that number is representative of what's actually in the field, then making the decision, then trying to use what best information you have then to decide how much nitrogen to apply.